Stanford University.
Hello, my name's Jo Boaler and I'm a Professor of Mathematics Education at Stanford University and the founder of UCubed, a new non-profit site that gives help to parents and teachers in mathematics learning, and I'll show you more of that at the end of the video. So there's a lot of confusion around about what's helpful in maths classrooms and whether the Common Core is going to help or hinder students' maths learning. Today, I'd like to share some of what we know from research that's come from careful studies of mathematics classrooms to help shed light on all of this. So in the US, math education has been built around a model that we know to be pretty faulty. Currently, almost 2/3 of students in the US are failing math, and that comes from before the days of Common Core. Some data that shows this clearly comes from two-year colleges. About 50% of students are in two-year colleges currently. 60% of them are placed into remedial math classes when they get there, basically repeating the math they took in high school. And even worse, only 25% of them pass. The rest fail or drop out and end up with no college degree. So math is the end of the road for them. We know that this is not because the students are lacking in any way. There is no such thing as a math gene or a math gift. It's not that they can't learn math. It's because of faulty mathematics teaching in the United States. So today I'm going to highlight 4 aspects of math instruction that need to change and show how the Common Core can help with those changes. First of all, we need to change math classrooms so that they offer math as a learning subject, not a performance subject. So what do I mean by that? Maths is the most over-tested, over-graded subject in the curriculum. If you ask most students what they think their role is in maths classrooms, they'll tell you it's to answer questions correctly. They don't even think that they're in maths classrooms to learn or to explore the rich set of connections that make up mathematics. They think they're there to get questions right. And this was really brought home to me recently when a colleague of mine told me that her 6-year-old son had come home saying he didn't like math. And when she asked him why, he said, math is too much answer time and not enough learning time. And it's interesting to me that even a 6-year-old was picking up that perception that maths is more about performing than it is about learning. So for students to see maths as a subject of learning instead of just a performance subject, we need tasks and questions in maths classrooms that have the space inside them to learn something. When students are spending all of their time in math class answering small questions that are right or wrong, it's very difficult to develop a learning orientation towards math. Students who approach math with a growth mindset, who believe that they can learn at any level, do much better in math. And at the end, I'll show you where you can learn more about mindset. Unfortunately, we knock students' self-belief out of them. And part of the way we do that is by giving them incorrect messages about math. And part of the way is by giving them constant questions that they think they're being evaluated all the time. So I want to show you what I mean by presenting maths questions with a space inside them to learn. When teachers ask students to find an area of a rectangle with sides of 12 and 4, which is a typical question, students are being asked to perform a single calculation correctly. There's one answer, there's usually one way of doing it. When teachers change the question slightly and ask students instead to find a rectangle with an area of 48, students are being asked to use their imagination and thinking. They need to consider different rectangles and to think about the relationships between length and width. They can propose different rectangles to each other and discuss the equivalence of area in the different rectangles. So in the first example, students were answering a question on area. In the second, they're learning about rectangles, about dimensions and area. So if a maths question doesn't have the space inside it to think and learn and discuss, then its potential as a learning task is very limited. Here's a second example. It comes from a math task designed by Ruth Parker. So I'd like you to really think about this question of how you see the shapes growing. You'll see that there are extra squares in each case. Where are they coming into the case? So I'm not asking you to think about numbers or to think about an algebraic expression, but visually, where do you see the extra squares coming when we move from one case to the next? So when we give students a task like this and they have to think about the growth of the function, they dive in and they're excited to show their different ways of thinking. It prompts levels of engagement that we rarely see in maths classrooms. Here are some different ways students can visually see the shapes growing, and you may have used one of these. My Stanford undergraduates and teachers I work with have started to give the different ways names. So many people see the shape growing by squares coming down on top, and my students have called this the raindrop method. Each time new squares come down like raindrops. Other people see it as what they call the bowling alley. It's like a row of pins coming in at the bottom, and each case has an extra row. Another way many people see it is what somebody's called the volcano method. So they sort of look at that central column and see that it goes up and kind of encourages the other squares out. And we can see the volcano method there. And then a fourth way that's really interesting is what I would call the square method. If you look at the first case, it's the best way to see this. If you move that red square and put it into the corner, you'll see you have a 2x2 square there. So some people see the shapes growing as growing squares. Now, I could have asked this question in a different way. Instead of asking you how you visually see it growing and where it grows to, I could have asked you the typical question, how many squares are in the 100th case? But when we ask the task in that way, this is what happens. People count the squares, they make a table often, they see that in the first case there's 4, in the second there's 9, in the third there's 16, and after some time, they'll eventually see that the function is growing as n plus 1 squared. And they'll say, I've got an answer, it's n plus 1 squared. Now, there's not a lot of space there to think differently. It doesn't recognize different ways of seeing it. And actually, the function we see there, n plus 1 squared, is a quadratic function. And so this goes to pretty high levels. But when I ask students who aren't asked to see it visually, but just stare like this, and I ask them, why is it squared? Why do you think that's squared? They'll usually don't know why it's squared. They don't even know what n is. So this is why it's squared. The function grows as a square, as we saw. So when we open tasks and ask students to think about how they see them and to talk with each other, the opportunities for learning are increased. When I give this task and ask students to consider it visually as they think about the expression, many more of them can come to understand what n is, they understand how this quadratic function grows, and they learn algebra with meaning. So this type of task is what I call a low floor, high ceiling task. It has a low floor, anyone can approach it and see how the squares are growing. But it has a very high ceiling. Students can take it to higher and higher levels and, investigate the quadratic function. So you can find all of that at UCubed, and I hope to see you there.